The concept of the marine managed area in St. Lucia has been quite successful.
But it's very important in terms of sustainable development and the environment.
The marine ecosystem as a whole is in itself a life support for small island developing states.
We were considered to be the flagship, the model, not just for the Caribbean, but for the world.
When the consultation came, they organized the different marine reserves, the no-take areas, multi-purpose use areas. Then we start seeing some more fish coming out.
The model proved to be so effective that other places actually adopted it.
In the early 1990s, St. Lucia began to experience a new and emerging trend that would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. Yachting enthusiasts, attracted by the rugged volcanic island's scenic natural beauty, especially the majestic twin peaks of the Pitons, had long been cruising from all points around the world to visit St. Lucia, and more were arriving each season. Scuba divers had also discovered St. Lucia's spectacular underwater world of pristine coral reefs, teeming with colorful fish and sea creatures. Scuba diving was growing by leaps and bounds as the sport became more accessible to the general public, and St. Lucia's exotic coastline and spectacular dive sites quickly became a must-dive destination for this new group of travelers. However, with all this new attention, some very real conflicts began to develop between these new users of St. Lucia's coastal marine areas, especially those in and around Soufriere, and those who had been using the area for generations.
So you found that a lot of tourists as well as locals would frequent Soufriere because of the sulfur springs, the pitons, and added to that you have the marine environment. So you would have a lot of users coming to the area to use the resources.
The fishermen were feeling displaced.
In these early days, some of the main problems we have, for example, the Hummingbird area, which is a very productive fishing ground, and yachtsmen used to use that area, depriving the fishermen of a good catch. Pot fishers had problems too. When they set the pot, divers used to cut the pot open to release the fish. They used to tie the pot to the bottom. All these were problems. Malgré had problems too. Yachts anchoring in fishing priority area.
Divers were complaining about the damage being done to the reefs by yachts and day charters anchoring on the reefs, and about damage caused by fish nets and pots. Yachtsmen were complaining about increasing threats and harassment from fishermen and divers alike.
There were a lot of user conflicts between yachtsmen, excursionists, snorkelers, divers, fishermen, tourists, speedboats, yachtsmen, cruise companies.
There was a lot of confusion and conflicts. There was also the situation where the resources were being depleted because of overfishing and overharvesting, improper practices as far as yachting is concerned and anchorage.
We had a very real problem on our hands, with no plans or policies in place for dealing with this new and growing conflict among the user groups. Not to mention that going unnoticed was the irreparable damage that the steady increase of unregulated land-based activities were having on the marine and coastal ecosystems.
Given the fact that now, making the transition between the ridge to the reef, we realize that the marine space is at the mercy of whatever happens within that watershed.
What you see now is silt. Now that silt came from an agricultural area or areas that were denuded of its cover. And what will happen is that all of that silt will eventually end up in the bay, in the ocean. Now obviously our coral reefs, our fish life, all of that will be affected as a result of man-made activities.
These very real pressures were increasing exponentially and having an extremely negative impact on the health and sustainability of the ecosystem.
Any sort of development that happens along the coast, be it touristic, industrial, residential development, agricultural development, affects the coastal environment. So of course you would need to have a system in place where things are not done in isolation, where you go ahead developing on land anyhow and not bear or have in consideration how it would affect our coastal resources, because of our river systems, drainage systems, everything that happens on land ends up in our sea.
In late 1992 and early 1993, a serious effort to mitigate these disturbing trends began. The National Trust joined forces with the Caribbean Area Natural Resources Institute, Canary, and approached fisheries, the Soufriere Foundation, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Tourism, and began to work on the common goal of finding and implementing a solution to the growing crisis. They all agreed that this effort required not just a temporary fix, but a comprehensive solution that would address all of the issues, conflicts, external pressures, and user group concerns for the long term. And from this, the Soufriere Marine Management Area was born. The entire area was officially mapped and then demarcated with marker buoys, along with signage onshore indicating the user zones and what activities were permitted in that area.
You have not only the marine reserve, but you have other zones like the yacht mooring areas, the recreational use areas, and as such, you allow sort of a zoning of activities to avoid overlap of issues and reduce the conflicts that can happen between users. Some of the issues with conflict, of course, is that a lot of the conflict breeds out of overuse of an area. And as such, if you can control resource users and how they use an area, it in turn improves the benefits they can reap out of the area, because the area now is improved in terms of the habitat and the benefits that they can provide to people.
The SMMA quickly became the shining example of how to effectively manage multi-user marine and coastal resources. The success and evolution of the SMMA continued steadily for well over 10 years, consistently breaking new ground in environmental conservation, ecosystem protection, and marine and coastal management systems. But then a slow and at first almost imperceptible decline began. The causes of this slow but steady decline were due to the fact that the priorities of politicians and policymakers began excluding ecosystem concerns in their relentless push for accommodating tourism and related developments. In addition, there was an increased burden on the ecosystem as a result of the steadily increasing amount of people from all the user groups converging on the area.
The first thing we need to do realistically is to reinvent the SMMA. The SMMA came out of one of consultation and education. Its focus has been on fee collection for its own survival. We need to be able to give the SMMA rangers and the management structure teeth so that they can enforce the laws.
Now, having just passed the 20-year anniversary, we are now at a point where many of the original conflicts that were the impetus of the original solution-driven marine management plan are again showing up.
20 years ago, the tourism product was not what it is now. It has grown. And so there are a lot more people wanting to come to the SMMA. I think now we need to start looking at broadening our scope of marine managed areas, not only looking at Soufriere, but expanding it to the entire island.
It even goes beyond the marine and coastal areas. Protected areas generally are seen worldwide as a key mechanism for ensuring sustainable development. If we allow development to proceed without checks and balances, we will find a complete depletion of the resources, a degradation of the environment, and serious impacts on all aspects of livelihoods.
Land clearing and construction activities associated with the rush to accommodate more visitors has taken a serious toll. The future of the ecosystem is under severe pressures and in very real danger of being lost altogether if actions are not taken immediately. Former Chief Forestry Officer Michael Bobb has taken over the reins as manager of the SMMA, and through his determination to restore the vision, the new SMMA has begun working to reverse these recent negative trends. The importance of the area to tourism cannot be overstated. Should this area, not to mention all of St. Lucia's natural heritage, be further compromised, the very things that attract visitors to St. Lucia will disappear, and the visitors will move on to different destinations.
We need the tourist dollar, but we cannot compromise the marine space. We cannot compromise our environment. If we do that, we are going to have more degradation. And at the end of the day, would we have the tourists? Would we have the divers?
As was demonstrated by the overwhelming success through the original efforts of the SMMA, when there is the political will and commitment to conservation, biodiversity and ecosystems can be managed, protected, and even thrive. Therefore, as a nation and as a people, we must all come together and demand that all of St. Lucia's natural heritage is respected, protected, and preserved.